summarize the work of the Center for Social Development a little bit in this area. We have Center for Social Development designs and tests innovations and several different areas of work, but savings and asset accumulation is one of the important body of work for us. We usually work with multiple methods. We do large long-term experiments, but we also do cross-sectional surveys. Sometimes we analyze longitudinal data sets that exist. We do in-depth interviews. We sometimes do cost-benefit studies. So depending on the study, we're likely to be doing several kinds of methods. A few of the results that may be pertinent, or some examples. Well, I should say the way I should make a theoretical statement. We don't see savings behavior as totally the result of individual action. We don't even use the phrase actually savings behavior. We use the phrase savings action. We think it's more often a combination of individual and institutional features. So, for example, in my 401k, my retirement plan, I signed up for this 30-some years ago. I haven't behaved in any way since that time. Yet the money has accumulated, actually quite a lot of money. And so I have enough money to retire and do as I like. I have never behaved in any way since 30 years. So we don't see this totally about individual behavior or savings habits, although we think that individual characteristics matter. We also think that features of savings products and services matter also. And this is an area that's been under conceptualized and understudied in terms of savings and asset accumulation. So we think at least half of the ballgame is on the structural side. Over a period of time, we developed a number of constructs that we use to try to think about the structural side. So we think that some of these overlap with the existing constructs, and large bodies of work have occurred, and some of them are relatively new. Incentives matter, obviously, is a standard idea, although we find in our research that incentives matter less than some other things. I'll get back to that point. Information matters, as you would expect. We find that restrictions matter. This is not a common construct in mainstream economics, is that people like to have choices, and actually, if you're thinking about savings and asset accumulation, people like not to have choices, and will express that, and they will behave more successfully when they don't have choices. So, for example, if money has restrictions on access or restrictions on use, people will tend to be better savers, and they will express appreciation for these qualities. So we think restrictions are important. We also have come to think of a construct that we call expectations, for lack of better language here. And I'll give you an example of this. We've been testing matching savings largely for adults, although these samples include some teenagers also. There's no difference. There's no statistical difference by age, so the results apply to the whole group. If, for example, we say to a group of low-income people, be it adults or teenagers, we will match your savings at a certain rate, 1-to-1 or 2-to-1. People will, it will help people will sign up for the program because of this. But once they're in the program, if we raise that matching rate, people won't save more. In fact, if you raise the matching rate high enough, people will save less. So there's a very complex relationship between what we think of as incentives and savings behavior. And I could talk more about that, but there's not really time. But what people really do respond to positively is something a little bit different. So if we say to people, we will match $25 a month, and then we turn around and say we'll match $35 a month, people respond very much to the amount of money that will be matched. We call this the match cap. And in fact, if in large data sets where we control for many other variables, people will respond to over 50 cents on the dollar for the match cap statistically. It's a huge statistical effect. So people are responding, and in-depth interviews, Margaret actually identified this with in-depth interview studies. What people say about this is that, well, this is what they take it as an expectation. This is what people say they will match, so the people felt they were expected to save this much. So people will try to save at the match cap. And by the way, in these studies, level of income is a very weak predictor, often not a predictor at all. So people, regardless of income level, usually will go for saving at the match cap, a very strong effect. There's not really a standard understanding of this in the literature so far. So I think I guess the larger point I would make is that these structural features of accounts and the incentives that they offer, this design of them, whether they're automatic or not. And a lot of progress has been made on automatic features, also really important, obviously. But there's other characteristics of savings accounts that I think we need to pay a lot more attention to. It's not all in the habits of individuals. And so I think it's good to be thinking about both of these kinds of things. So we're testing, we relate to this too, sort of larger policy context in the U.S. and really in many developed countries. Saving asset accumulation highly subsidized for people who are not poor. This is a policy statement, not a research statement. So we don't have any problems recommending very high subsidies because through the tax system in the United States, at least, both home owning and retirement accounts and a bunch of other things are subsidized a lot. If you add up all these tax subsidies in the U.S., it is currently about $500 billion a year, about $500 billion. It's a massive subsidy, not going to people at the bottom at all. So we don't have any trouble at all suggesting that lower income people who are saving ought to get really large subsidies. And I think there's a real policy reason for that. And as researchers who have some values about making policies for saving and asset accumulation fair, I think that's also should be part of our agenda. So testing large subsidies, I think, should also be important. And by way of this, we do test large subsidies for children and youth. So, for example, we in the last 4 years ago, we randomly assigned kids in a random assignment to births in Oklahoma, 1,360 children. Opened accounts for 1,360, control group another 1,360, and the results are pretty positive so far. The main result was automatic account opening, and so got virtually 100% of account opening. We're trying to demonstrate universal. This is the inclusive value, bring everybody into savings and asset accumulation. So we think in that project we've demonstrated that you can use, in this case, a state college savings plan, make it universal. People have responded to that. It's an important lesson because being truly universal is not it's a bigger challenge than you might think. It sort of sounds easy, we'll give everyone an account, but actually making that happen in the world is another matter. So we've demonstrated that's possible using a college savings account. Of course, the amounts of money and the numbers of college savings plans that are held by the treatment group far exceed those of the control group. We think this is a really important result also because, again, we're quite happy with large subsidies for everyone, so we think that's an important policy result. If we look at only the individual behavior, aside from all the subsidies and automatic account opening, so the account opening of the individuals in the treatment group much higher than the control group. 16% of the treatment group opened an additional account and put money into it, so that's statistically compared to 2% of the control group, so statistically a large effect there. The amounts of money that were saved in the treatment group also larger than the control group for their own individual savings. Pretty modest difference, but again, it's across the whole. It's the whole intent to treat population, so everyone in the treatment group compared to everyone in the control group. So interesting results there, interesting policy results, interesting results even from the standpoint of individual behavior, and we'll try to be following these kids for a long period of time. Our real goal, and I'll end with this, is that we're not, as I said in the remarks this morning, it's not really about the money. We'll be looking at whether these kids in Oklahoma start to do better in school because they have a savings account for college. We do have reason to believe in quite a few studies now with longitudinal data sets that if there's some savings in a child's name, controlling for everything else we can observe, there are really quite positive relationships with educational attainment. So there's some reason to believe that in an experiment we may also start to find differences in educational attainment across the years, that children have an account that they believe is for their post-secondary education. So that's the hypothesis. We have other evidence that may operate through expectations, and it's back to the expectations variable, that some savings accounts in a child's name is associated with both usually associated with both parents and children's expectations for educational attainment, and that variable in turn across time is associated with great educational achievement. So we have some evidence of this psychological effect of having an account, reshaping expectations, and then reshaping behavioral outcomes in the world. So that's the research agenda by and large. We're doing this work in some other countries around the world. So I'll just end with, there's a project by Fred Sewamala, who's part of our larger team, but he's on the faculty at Columbia University now. Project in Uganda with HIV/AIDS orphans, providing match savings accounts for primary school children who wouldn't have been able to go to secondary school otherwise, almost very likely couldn't afford. So the Ugandan kids were asked to save, and their savings would be matched 2 to 1 to get enough for post-secondary tuition compared to the control group. They were able to do that actually surprisingly high rates. So they accumulated quite a lot of money in Ugandan shillings. Was matched 2 to 1, and these kids, almost all of them went on secondary school, or are still in secondary school. And in addition to being in school, they changed but compared to the comparison group, their HIV-related sexual behaviors were much more positive. So they were less at risk of becoming HIV/AIDS victims itself. So indication here of both positive educational and health outcomes, which I think in a lot of places that's what we're looking for. So in the USAID project that we now have in several countries, very much interested in not only whether kids are able to stay in school, but whether their health outcomes also